We welcome our friend Michael Wilbon, the Hall of Famer, to the show. This is the rarest of rare, Michael, the big event home game. So I hope you're enjoying that opportunity. And I'm happy we welcome you in off that sound from Monty about the idea of trust. And I wonder how the trust he has in Chris, the trust Chris has in his young guys, is revealing itself throughout this playoff run, but in particular tonight in the Game 1 victory.
Well, Scott, I mean, that dynamic is such a great part of what the Suns have been able to put together this entire season. And, I think they come about in different ways. I mean, you see the sort of calm that Monty Williams has. And listen, he's always been that way. I mean, I've been watching Monty Williams on some level since he was in high school, again, a D.C. guy.
Sure.
And Chris demands it. And it doesn't mean he has to demand it verbally. But, I mean, I remember asking Devin Booker at some point very early in the season, the start of the season, after the practices and training camp, and I said, what is this like with Chris being this demanding? And Book, his eyebrow went up and he said, it's not for everybody. And
right.
he was still paying the ultimate compliment because they revere him. This is not a normal sort of veteran player, respected by the youngsters. It isn't. It's much more than that. I mean, Chris Paul felt that Ayton hadn't really been coached all that hard relative to what he ought to see in terms of what he ought to be. And so you talk about demanding. I mean, Chris started this season that when people outside of Greater Phoenix weren't really paying attention, they have been, since the All-Star break. But the two of them, the marriage between Monty Williams and Chris Paul, superstar and coach, I mean, that's an enormous, enormous part of what's happened here this winter and spring and summer now.
Rings in sports can be almost unfairly held against those that don't win them, in my opinion. If you go back to your typewriter column days, Michael, and you assess what the significance of this first step towards potentially adding a ring to Chris Paul's already lengthy resume, how would you go about describing what he provided specifically tonight?
Well, I think that tonight was bigger for the Suns. I know it's the NBA Finals. It's big for everybody. It's not like the Bucks have won anything anytime recently. But Chris understands the entirety of this because he's been on the wrong side of it, Scott, as you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's been on some just unfortunate series enders, unlucky, not well played. I mean, Chris will run these down to you. He owns it, and he wants to get away from it, but to get away from it, you got to play away from it. It just doesn't go away. And so I think that once there was a point late in the season, which I talked to Chris, and he said, we know we can be really good. And I said, so how can you? Do you hear what I'm saying? Really, really good. For Chris Paul to say that, he's ramping up to the playoffs, and he understood what was possible. And then you get in the playoffs, and you beat LeBron and the Lakers, no matter if Anthony Davis is injured or not. You sweep Denver. You beat the Clippers. You go through these things that he had been on the other side of. I mean, Chris Paul had been within what? A game or a good really quarter of beating the Golden State Warriors when he was with Houston and he pulled a hamstring and he was the guy. People keep saying, well, do we put an asterisk next to this because, the Suns aren't playing teams with their best players? What about the teams that got Chris Paul and his team but without their best player or their most important player in Houston when it was Chris Paul with the injury? So he realizes these opportunities don't come along often. And while he hasn't said this, Scott, I'm certainly thinking this as somebody watching this team a lot. Think of the Western Conference next year. And if you just sort of say to yourself, oh, we got another shot at this. We got a young Booker, and we got this, and now we got a great coach of the year. And you come back and you got Kawhi back in the lineup for the Clippers, and you got Anthony Davis and LeBron healthy, and you got Jamal Murray healthy, and you got what other changes are going to happen in the Western Conference. You can't look later. You got to look now. And I thought Chris played with that urgency both against the Clippers in that clinch game, and I thought he played with it certainly tonight, and everybody followed his lead. That's the big part of this. They follow him with a dedication and a fervor, if you will, and I think that really speaks well of everything Phoenix has got going on.
Michael, I can't tell you how many times, particularly at the Masters, I've said, when that opportunity presents itself, you better grab that jacket by both lapels because you think it's coming later and it might never knock on your door again. Look, still 3 wins to go. No one's throwing a parade yet, but they win the first one. I just have a last sort of overarching thought about these finals, Michael, because, look, you get to go to Springfield because of a career that's been distinguished in a lot of ways, but you covered so many finals. This one lacks a familiar villain or protagonist? Because you're talking about 75 years combined not being here. I'm interested in how to feel just in terms of this is the finals, and these are teams that we're not familiar with being on this stage. I just wonder how you sort of consumed it.
Well, Scott, I'm certainly involved in it. I'll admit emotionally in a way that I might not be with others because I'm the editor on Chris's very personal project, which has less to do with the season than it does with his life and family. And so I've been sort of close to him and that all season. And when he was going to be traded to the Suns, it was something I sort of had to sit on for a few days because he thought this was going to happen. He was going to come here. He wanted to play with Booker. And so the Suns have been, to me, as good a story as there's been in the NBA this season. And I know the story's been dominated, the season's been dominated by injuries and this person out and this star out and this superstar missing. And the Suns have somehow navigated that without having it, even though it looked like it might happen to Chris again. First game, remember, against LeBron, he suffers that injury with the shoulder. We don't know what's going to happen. Then he tests positive for COVID, which statistically, when you've been vaccinated, is just something that doctors say is insanely, it's like next to impossible. So that story, for a lot of people, is good enough. But Scott, I think that it's really important. Look, the league can't live off of LeBron and Curry forever.
I agree.
Can't. And the league got caught in this way with Michael Jordan, right? Well, how long did the hangover after Michael's retirement, the last retirement, how long did that last? It lasted for years, and the league couldn't get away from it. The bad basketball played. Oh, there are no marketable stars. I don't know if that was ever true, but that was the perception. Now you've got people, and this goes away from Chris a little bit, like Devin Booker. I mean, who is a star, who people are just really seeing and appreciating for the first time. I did a cover story piece for the network in January, maybe early February, about Booker being the most anonymous superstar in the league. And he was. Not so much after 3 series wins, and he comes out here and does this in game 1. But I know what you're saying. You're right. There's an unfamiliarity here. The league better push this. They better learn how to do this. These are guys that we're going to see, and there's going to be another young cast of them moving up. DeAndre Ayton, don't let me miss him. Sure. So there are players that people are going to grab onto for the first time. You're right. It is something that a lot of people, maybe casual fans, are looking around saying, I don't know, how much am I going to buy into this? But I think if you watch particularly the Suns, and, this is Antetokounmpo's first time reaching the finals. So I think there are a lot of people there that folks can identify with, but it's going to take more games, more performances. And if the Suns continue to play like this, and I think they can, they're going to emerge from this as a team that is familiar. And they'll join those other teams as they return their stars next year. I should have mentioned the Nets in there as well, that I think people will feel differently about. But this is a chance for a coming out party for a couple of teams and several stars.
Well, I agree. Listen, you could be a star, just like the golf analogy. You can be a star in the game, but you need to win a major in that sport. You need to win titles in this sport to be truly minted as legendary. And these two teams have that opportunity. As always, Michael, your time's appreciated. Be well, enjoy, all right?
Scott, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So it comes in a losing effort, but it is an NBA Finals debut from Giannis coming off injury that's still impressive. One of just 6 players in NBA history with 20 and 15 in the NBA Finals debut. As fate would have it, his opponent, DeAndre Ayton, that Michael was just mentioning, joined that list in Game 1. Coach Bud, who you heard from earlier on what he saw from his 2-time MVP, Giannis, tonight.
I thought there were a lot of good things. I mean, I think, considering, 5 days and